And we are back. How's everybody today? Welcome to Federal Workers' Comp Coffee Break Podcast. I am the OWCP consultant located in the sunny area of Florida. I come to you today with a very difficult topic that's very important. So I want you to get your notepads out and get your pens out. And as usual, when we get together, let's get your coffee going. So while you're getting your coffee going and I'm getting my coffee going, let's get gather our materials and get ready to get started. And we're going to cover a very difficult topic today, which is the CA-2 Occupational Illness or Disease Claim Form, which is very difficult to file correctly. Probably the most difficult next to a CA-2A, which we're going to do a separate podcast for that CA-2A. But let's gather up, let's sit down, get your earbuds in, get your coffee going, get your notepad going, and let's get started. And as usual, before we get started, I'll talk a little bit about things that are important for you and I to cover on this one that you need to remember to take notes on, and then remember to share this with other people. So without further ado, let's get started as we always do. Let's get our coffee going. As we get our coffee going, we're going to sit down and get started with the best short form podcast out there and learning how to do the workers' comp arena quickly. So I want to remember to always start you off with a disclaimer to make you understand that here we discuss all sort of topics related to OWCP, FECA, DOL Longshore, and any other type of federal workers' compensation. I will do VA eventually. In this short coffee break format, we discuss common topics related to filing appropriate claims, understanding your rules, your rights, the provisions, responsibilities, and all that. We cover it with tips on how to successfully navigate federal workers' comp to assist you with your claim filing or to assist others that you're trying to help with their claim filing. It's important to understand that I am a consultant. I have now 27 years doing this business, but it's a moving target. Workers' comp's always changing, and you have to understand that because of that, I always tell you to refer to OWCP's website and double check the information that I give you. Even I, as I'm getting older, forget things that's hard to remember. It's a lot of information associated with these kinds of federal workers' comp claims. I just try to give you the most short form assistive direction to help you with successful filing of your claim. So let's jump in and let's get started. And what we're going to start off with first is understanding what a CA-2 occupational illness or injury is. Now, we talked about CA-1s being a traumatic injury, and I told you that I kind of nicknamed the CA-1 being a one-day injury. It happens as a traumatic event on one day. A CA-2 is an event or an illness that covers 2 or more shifts. That means it's a range of dates. It could be days, weeks, and months. I've even seen claims filed that took years. In order to understand how that works, and that's the reason why I say that 2 days, 2 shifts, CA-2, helps you remember. Occupational illness is defined by OWCP as a medical condition produced in the work environment over a period longer than a single workday or shift. Okay? Now, that can be caused by anything. Factors such as being exposed to things that cause you an infection, black mold, mesothelioma, asbestos. Those are all occupational illnesses. You can also have a continuation or repeated stress or strain or exposure to hazardous elements such as, fumes or radiation. Okay, these are all work environment factors. And when you're exposed to them over a period of time and it makes you sick, it becomes an occupational illness or an occupational injury. You need to understand that the history is important to establish that it's beyond a single day event or a single shift type of injury. And most people file this given a date of injury without a full detailed explanation that we're filing it on a certain date, but the date of injury is explained in the CA-2 and in the supporting documents that there's a date range involved. And we're going to cover that in detail. First, understand that the establishing of an occupational illness or injury falls on you. Okay? It's not the burden of your employment agency like it is on a CA-1 traumatic injury. This is you. You have to prove that your employer environment caused this. So the burden of proof on this one is very different than CA-1. The burden of proof for proving the history of the injury type of claim falls on your ability as the injured worker filing this claim to prove that this illness or injury is related to employment factors or it's aggravated by employment. This needs to be well explained. Okay, the employer usually does not assist or cooperate with these types of claim filings. Do not expect them to just jump up and down and want to help you. Most people are like, what? What are you talking about? We're not going to help you with that. And don't expect them most of the time to give you a CA-16 authorization to treat either. Okay, so don't expect a lot of help on these. In fact, the injured worker usually, when you're a federal worker, you need to try to request the CA-16, but don't be surprised if the employer agency doesn't give it to you or that your claims manager or OWCP claims examiner will assist you with it either. So the worker will receive at his home address upon OWCP receiving the initial filing of this type of claim in an envelope or in the mail, and that will include all the necessary forms once you've filed your CA-2. So understand the steps. Okay, let's go through the steps. You need to understand the steps. First of all, you need a detailed statement. I'm talking about the federal worker. You need a detailed statement as an injured worker of your job duties. That means everything you do, where you work, what your environment it is, and you got to list all your active duties, all your required tasks, anything that you do that you perform in the area that you perform it during your normal scope of employment. And if you're doing something outside your normal scope of employment, explain why and who made you do something outside, okay? The statement should also state how long the employee has been working at the position, how many days, weeks, months, years you've been performing that duty and all those tasks and activities, and be detailed. Talk about everything from how much bending, stooping, walking, climbing, anything that's involved. Chronic repetitive overuse syndromes, especially carpal tunnel. Remember, you got to detail how many hours a day that you're using your hands holding an instrument or typing on a keyboard and how many days, weeks, hours, and years are involved. Remember, the claims examiner doesn't know what you do for a living. It's important to understand this. The detailed statement should include also, because it's required, all your hobbies and activities so that you can rule that out as a contributing factor in case they want to say, oh, this is all pre-existing and you did it at home. In addition, you need to understand that the detailed signed statement by you, describing in detail exactly what it is that you do, you want to make sure that description, okay, is descriptive enough that someone who doesn't know you or your job really understands what it is that you do in detail that would cause this. Okay, the claims examiner is going to rely on you to explain the factors of aggravation of employment, and then the second part of your employment statement is going to be supported by a physician narrative where he's going to do a causation statement. The statement of daily duties and what you do in your environment, all that stuff has to be read, and the doctor has to agree that these are aggravating factors. So your employment statement is everything on CA-2. A description of your duties and all of the stuff is probably the most valuable thing that you can do. So make sure you're very detailed about what you do at your work that would cause this. Also, like I said, you got to get that statement to have been read by the physician that you see that's an approved OWCP provider, and make sure that he says, I've read the statement, I've read the factors, I've gone over this history with the patient, and I concur medically that this is a work-related condition. Without that, you have no chance. Review the worker's statement in detail and make sure that you are happy with your statement and description before you submit it. Make sure there's enough aggravation, precipitation, acceleration listed that are required as part of your employment. You want to make sure that the detailed statement is presented whenever you see the doctor, so try to have that written and have all the pains and aches and when it started and how it hurts. It's not just the factors. You want to talk about the things that aggravate it, but you also want to report aches and pains and stiffness. And you want to report any time that you were treated by Occ Health, or any time that you saw your family doctor and you thought it was just you getting old, or it might be something else. Whatever it is that would add to it, add that to your history and talk about the pain, the suffering, and the difficulties it's interfered with your everyday life and your work. In your detailed statement, you want to make sure that this history of injury is very well documented to correlate it to what you're reporting in your history, but your doctor has to take your history and correlate it to physical exam findings. Those two dots have to be connected by you and your doctor. That's everything in a CA-2. Okay? You've got to get a doctor that'll state in his report that he's reviewed these two detailed components, that there was aggravation through the work environment, and the pain and suffering and the injuries and the signs and symptoms are consistent with the report of injury. That's the two big factors. Now, in the details, you want to get your medical doctor to complete your report and make sure the medical report includes many of the following. Okay? You want to make sure there's a definitive diagnosis. You can't have a doctor that says maybe. I'm going to do an entire podcast on two stories that broke my heart that I had worked on over the years, where there was one word said wrong by a doctor and it took a year and a half to fix it in a CA-2. So you can't have maybe language. The doctor has to be definitive. You got to include the statement by the physician that you see that the doctor's read the injured worker statements and that the doctor has reviewed the statement with the patient after reading the statement, and that he agrees that this injured worker statement is consistent with his exam findings. So include in your statement how what you did caused, aggravated, or accelerated the conditions of employment on your injury claim. And you want to make sure that all the activities and duties that contributed are mentioned by your doctor, and he agrees with those conditions being consistent with your exam findings. If you're trying to do a condition that's a pre-existing condition that's being aggravated, then say that. Say, listen, I had carpal tunnel surgery 10 years ago. I've been working on normal duty, but my carpal tunnel has been aggravated and accelerated by typing at a keyboard for the last 10 years, and it's gotten considerably worse. It's very deteriorated. That aggravation is covered as a consequential injury. It is considered an aggravation of a pre-existing condition, which under OWCP rules and provisions is a new injury. Now, if you have aggravations, those are also can be filed under CA-2A, a notice of reoccurrence. We're going to go over that in a separate podcast, so I'm not going to go over it in detail here, but there are ways to do it depending on your circumstances. For this one, we're going to talk more about a new CA-2. So the physician causation statement has to be included in a report. You're going to need to understand that for any chance for a properly filed CA-2, Federal Occupational Illness or Injury OWCP claim, you're going to need a narrative from your physician. And that medical narrative, you have to have that first, because most of everything that goes with a CA-2 comes from that narrative. Your claim will not be accepted without a proper medical narrative by a physician. A physician who doesn't regularly write reports for OWCP, like urgent care centers or your family medicine doctor that you go see for your regular medical needs, or some orthopedic surgeon, those guys don't write these kind of reports. You need a workers' comp doctor. You know, that's one of the things in our clinic. Our doctors, we're OCMed. We're OCMed or Family Med that has been trained in occupational medicine. Everybody in our clinic is board certified in either OCMed or Family Med with decades of experience. In our clinic in Florida, in Tampa and Jacksonville, we do workers' comp, and our doctors are board certified in occupational environmental medicine. Why is that important? Because writing medical legal reports in workers' comp is not something that's trained in medical school. Very little doctors have little or no idea how to write a proper OWCP narrative report. You need to understand it. That's why we take same-day appointments at our clinic, is to help you be accommodated for these kind of conditions. We know how important a proper narrative is. Secondly, a well-reasoned medical opinion is the most important part of your medical narrative. Your claim's never going to be accepted if the medical opinion's narrative of causality is well-reasoned. He has to state that in his medical opinion that your condition is related. He has to be specific. Your part of the narrative, that part of the narrative is crucial. In my opinion, it's most crucial. You have to understand that a well-reasoned medical opinion is crucial to the successful filing. What you have to know is that in the FECA manual, your physician has to state what agency you work for, what your start date was, what position you held on the date of your injury, the physical requirements of your job. He has to demonstrate that he's read the description of the physical requirements of your job, what you actually did, and how much of that is a contributing factor. Your physician should attach a copy of the job description, and he needs to state that this job description is the causative factor in his narrative of causation. This detailed narrative is time-consuming, it's a pain in the butt, very difficult to find doctors that are good at it, and most of the people that come to me, Mr. Fix-It, to try to fix their problems with their cases are poorly filed CA-2s. Understand that, and you'll have a great chance. Now, when you file this with OWCP, your name, the claim number, date of injury, anything that you can get submitted from your physician needs to be in the reports if they're available, or needs to be added. You need to understand that in Section 2-812-6A of the FECA manual, the content of the medical report states, and this is what they're saying specifically is included. Regardless of whether the CE, the claims examiner, contacts a physician or the claimant, your doctor's medical narrative has to include the date of the examination, which is most recent, results of objective testing, and results of physical exam finding, and he has to list the diagnosis. And the diagnosis cannot be sprain strain, or in other words, those are traumatic injury diagnoses. Contusion. Contusion is not a CA-2. Okay, they have to be chronic repetitive exposure illnesses or chronic repetitive overuse musculoskeletal conditions. That's probably 90% of them. He has to use a diagnosis that fits that. You can't say hand pain and call it a CA-2. A well-reasoned medical opinion supported by the physical findings and objective testing has to be, this objective testing has to be to whether the current condition is related to employment. The claimant's work restrictions, including the form, either CA-5 or a CA-17, needs to be completed, and it needs to demonstrate what your restrictions are, and also if you can get a job description by your employing agency, it needs to be listed in the report. The type and frequency of medical treatment being provided or recommended, all this is required. And you can find that all on the FECA links page that I mentioned in that section. Now, when you're trying to complete all the information boxes in the CA-2 form itself, make sure you understand that the CA-2 form needs to be filled out with the employing agency within 30 days from the time that the injured worker receives this doctor's report from the physician. The earlier you can get this done, the better. It's not advisable to complete a CA-2 form to file to the employee agency and OWCP until the doctor has examined the patient and agreed that the exam findings, the history of the statement of the injured employee, and the history of illness are consistent with occupational illness. So in this case, seeing a doctor and getting a doctor to write his narrative, you should do that first. Bring the narrative and then file the CA-2. That's the opposite of what we do in CA-1. So when you're doing the procedural filing of CA-2, here are some helpful hints. You want to make sure that the notice of occupational disease and claims for compensation CA-2, there's portions for the employee that are filled out in boxes 1 through 18. And you submit this form to the supervisor or whoever is designated as your employee agency representative. And you want to include with that your statement. Remember, you have a factual employment statement that you filled out and you've signed. And I've always recommended you do that in handwriting, so there's no discrepancy that someone else wrote it for you, like a lawyer or a doctor's office. Okay, and then once you've filled out your portion and given it to the supervisor, and you handed over the statement, remember, there's a medical report that's going to be added that's going to relate the history and cause of the injury and illness. So make sure to obtain a receipt from your supervisor or employee agency representative when submitting the form to them. Now, at the time the form is received from the employee, the supervisor is to complete the receipt of notice of disease or illness, and he has to give it. That's a rule. Okay, that notice of receipt is your guarantee that if it gets lost in translation or lost in filing, that one was filed and you have the receipt. Remember, if a medical expense is incurred or lost time is also going to be incurred or expected, the completed form must be sent to OWCP within 10 working days after it is received from the employee. So you got to understand, that's the rules for the employer and the employee. These steps are very important to follow correctly to make sure you have the best chance to establish an occupational illness or injury complaint. You have to instruct, okay? You have to instruct that the injured worker has to, let me say it a different way. The injured worker has to request a copy of the signed last page with the receipt of notice, occupational disease or illness. You also need to request any and all documents and notes that the employee agency submits to OWCP. You want a copy of everything that they say. A lot of these CA-2s are disputed. You need to know what they said if they try to submit the CA-2 with additional employer forms saying that they disagree with it. Okay, you have a right to those copies. The injured worker needs to bring a copy of the completed CA-2 of the last page, signed receipt, employer section 19 through 34 has to be filled out by the employer agency representative, and that needs to be provided, all of this, to the physician. Now, there are CA-17 work duty status forms that need to be filled out in case you're going to be on modified duty or taking off work. Don't forget about that. Go back to CA-17 and COP podcasts if you have questions on that. There's a Side A on a CA-17 that has to be filled out by the employer. There's a Side B that has to be filled out by your doctor. You also need to know one last step. CA-2s are different than CA-1s on attending physician statements. There is a specific CA form for CA-2s that is called a CA-35. CA-1s want attending physician statements of a CA-20. CA-2s are wanting a CA-35. It's important to know the distinction and the difference. If you have a CA-2 filed and you are going to file it, your doctor's evidence needs to be supported for the claim in the form of a CA-35 and not a CA-20. This form is a checklist, and it's organized by any type of injury you sustain. There are several different types of CA-35s. There's a handful of them. There's one specifically for lung conditions, heart conditions, carpal tunnel. So look those forms up, but there's CA-35s for individual conditions. Once you get the CA-35, you want to make sure that you include that form being filled out by your physician. And the report should include in the CA-35 dates of exam, your treatment, your history, your x-ray or lab find, anything that can help with diagnosis. You also want to mention the course of treatment, treatment plan, and make sure that your physician on the CA-35 provides his opinion, his medical reasons, his causal relationship explanation, all on the form. And make sure that your doctor describes your ability to perform your duties, whether they're regular or modified. And if you're going to be disabled for some period of time for your regular job, that doctor needs to identify the dates that he thinks the disability is going to cover and provide work tolerance limitations, future. That's all stuff that needs to be done in the checklist of the CA-35. So check off each item as it is completed. Make sure that it's all done and before you submit. Now, when you're going to submit, the old days we used to submit with the envelope and send it all to London, Kentucky, at the Department of Labor's Office of Workers' Comp Programs on P.O. Box 8300, District 16, DAL, London, Kentucky, 40742-8300. But with eComp, you can get all this stuff filed. The employer has their, it's not called eComp, it's called something else, but you can file these forms through eComp. But I also recommend you get a copy of everything. The reports from the doctor, your written statement, you had signed, your doctor's CA-2 filled out, with the employer filled out, with your notice of receipt, your CA-35. I submit all of it in the mail, return receipt, so that you get it back in the mail, that someone signed for it. That's just me. I've been doing this 27 years. I know I'm an old dog. That's old hat. But that is another backup plan. You don't have to do that. eComp allows you to do a lot of this. And you can go on to eComp, and it tells you the steps and how to file it. So if you go to the website, you can look at how to upload this documentation on the government's website, and the website tells you the steps and how long to expect, etc. So once you've done all that, then you want to reach out to your claims examiner, and you want to make sure that you tell your claims examiner that you have filed a form, or if they don't have you assigned a claims examiner, talk to anybody and say, give them your information and say, I'd like my claims examiner to call me, and I want their email, their fax, and their phone number, direct line, once they've had confirmation that they've received it. And so I usually give it a week or so to start calling on it. So that's a CA-2, and it's important that a properly filed CA-2 with a detailed medical report, with a CA-2 and a CA-35 with your factual employment statement and your doctor's medical narrative, and that says that he's read and he agrees with it, is all performed in order for you to have a successful claim. Okay, a CA-2 is not simple. It can be very tough. So I've been talking so much I haven't had a chance to work on drinking my coffee. But the music has cued. That means time's running out. So I'm going to start wrapping it up. But listen, guys, you can always reach me at FedComp Consultants at Proton Mail. And I want you to understand that if you need a provider in Florida, you can always reach out to me. I can be reached out to at 813-877-6900. And, of course, FedComp Consultants at Proton Mail if you just need me to help you and your provider in the state that you practice if I can't help you as a provider. Okay? Thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it. As usual, I always want to thank you guys for your service. If you get up every day and you put on a badge, you put on a gun, if you're delivering that mail, or if you're handling all that bureaucratic, administrative, government thick stuff, we thank you for your service. And as always, I just want you to remember, I'm here to help. And I thank you for joining me. And if you think this podcast can help you or help someone else, please share it and let other people know that there's a place you can go to get quick answers in short coffee break format. And I'm going to go back to my coffee, and I'll see you next time.